Okay, welcome to part 2 for Revit model optimization. Part 1 went over a bit of theory as to how to look at the model, etc. And in number 2 here we're going to go through a bit more breaking down and processing of the model itself. Okie dokie, so first thing is detach all large objects such as walls and reattach into manageable pieces. So here we have parts of the cladding and the internal walls. So actually we'll just turn off the cladding and the cabinetry, and we will look down until we get to our internal wall colors. So you can see here we have all our internal wall pieces here detached. Okay. Now basically what happens is this comes in as one object, one big object, as you saw in the last video. And we select the object, click it, it'll pick everything, and you go to this script that we have called elements to objects. Just got to find it. I may not have installed it on here yet. No, let's have a quick look for it. So we've got elements to objects, dragging that into the scene, and now we're going to look for that. We might have to select, I might have to just go out of it and come back in. Okay, toolbars, main UI. Yeah, I might have to select all commands, then browse down in here. There it is. New. Okay, so you select the object, you copy its name, so you select all that text, and then you open your script up where I've put it. There it is. And then when you have that object selected, you paste the name in, you click detach. And then what will happen is you'll essentially have all these little pieces. Hundreds. And we don't want hundreds and hundreds of them. We want maybe 20 or 30. So you want something manageable. So with a light map, a light map maximum, we want a light map will have maximum resolution of 512 pixels. So on a square surface, essentially, or in little square pixels, right? So if you took 512 pixels and spread that across that entire model, you'd have little 512 little squares across that whole model, and that's all the light information. Each pixel can only store a little bit of light information. That would be, that would just be too big. The object would be too big to fit that information into it. So we break it into smaller pieces. So for example, this piece. So that piece, there you go. That will be fine for a light map. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take pieces and break them into more manageable pieces. So these are looking alright. They're not tiny, but they're not probably not too big either. But you know, the good thing about this is too that once we bring it into Unreal Engine, we'll be able to tell very quickly whether like we need to come back into Max and split that up even further. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm just going to I'm going to consolidate the rest of these pieces, these internal wall colors. So these ones here, so we're doing all right there. So we've got all of these guys. I'm going to put them into a layer called working on, or just always good to group things. Internal walls to be processed. So it's always good to be using terminology that makes sense to not just you but to anyone else using what you're doing. Okay, so basically we can see here we've got a few that are finished. So these ones are finished and these ones aren't. So I'm just going to quickly finish these ones off. You can see here. So I'm going to turn them all off and I'll just look at them one by one essentially. So that piece is very small. Same with that piece and that piece. So I'm looking for bigger pieces. So all these guys, I'm just going to flick on a few and just see what I can join together. Because it doesn't really matter necessarily where they go. Sorry, that's just the dog. So we can see that we don't need to be psycho about it. We just need to pick, if we can pick pieces that are all together, that will be even better, but it's not necessarily required. It's just the amount of surface area that it's covering shouldn't be too large. So if we take all of these, we'll just pick one, press X on our keyboard and go attach. Actually, what we'll do is we'll go to our modifiers over here and we'll look for the attach list function and we'll select all of them and go OK. Alright, and then we'll drag him up into the completed section. So I'm just going to go ahead and do these next few pretty quickly. So I can see this piece is a good size just by itself, so I'm putting it up in the finished section. Anything that's too small, I'm keeping together, like all of these. And then there's enough here now for the surface area that we kind of want. So we'll do this again. Attach list. Okay, good. Okay. And now I'm just going to be doing the same thing again. Just going down, turning things on. And then if I see a big piece, like that, yeah. So now that's enough surface area. Actually, see this piece? It's actually a piece of the floor. It's actually floor and wall. So we'll look for those pieces at the very end, and we'll separate the floor off completely because we don't want any flooring being the same as the wall color 90% of the time. So, but we'll just put it all together for the moment. So. So you can see lots of little pieces here. These are all going to be pretty good to go together. See, like there's tons here, and these are all. So yeah, there we go. So there's a piece on the floor there, and that can go off into its own section. That can be a component of its own or an object of its own. All of these can go into one. I might even look for a few more. Yep. Okay, so those bits at the end there that I was just doing, so these pieces here, so they're all kind of roughly like these bits. So what I would probably do is I'd select all of these because I want all them together, and then go isolate selection. So now I've got all these little bits, so now I'll do the attach list bit here. Okie dokie. Alright, now that's one piece. He's good to come up. Okay. And then end isolate, and that'll bring us back to what we had switched on before. Just zooming out a bit to see if there's anything I'm turning on here. Yeah, this can all still pretty much be the same light map, I reckon. Yeah. Alright, so all these bits can jump in together. So we'll select one of these, attach, and attach list. Okie dokie. So now we have about 20 bits, which is perfect. So what we're going to do is go ahead and just rename these quickly so that it makes sense when we're looking at it in Unreal Engine. It doesn't really matter, but if you've got all these bizarre numbers, you know, at least this way you'll know, okay, well, I've got, 20 pieces, this is piece 5. It's very easy when you've got bizarre numbers to accidentally, rename something, or when you're importing something, things go, a number gets confused. So if you've got logical numbers and logic throughout everything you're doing, you will find things will not screw up on you quite as often. Okie dokie, nearly finished. Yeah, 18 pieces. That's perfect. That's optimal. Oops. It doesn't really matter. I'll just make that 17. Okay. So now we have all of our internal walls broken off. Okay. And predominantly, the internal walls will be the ones that you have to do the majority of this with. You've got your cladding, which you may have to break up a little bit too, and you just use the same process. You may use the same. You will use the same process, but if the elements to objects method doesn't work, then you will need to take another method into account. So now I'm just looking at these floor pieces, and I'm detaching those. And I'm going to call them H4 internal wall, IW, and then floor. So it's not the floor that you want, but yeah, it's hard to explain. So sometimes the Revit model won't have it'll have a piece of flooring underneath here, and then there'll be other flooring on top of it for each part of the bedroom, but that'll be a base level floor underneath. So you use that, and you put a certain type of material on that, which will show you once you get into Unreal Engine, and then you'll have, so if there's any gaps in the other flooring that the Revit modeler has put on there, then there you go. So I've detached that piece, and we can see him somewhere there. Okay, so we'll turn that bit off. Okay, and then we want this piece segregated off. So I'm just using polygon mode. Actually, I can, yeah, polygon mode, yep. Actually, wonder, element mode may work too, as long as it doesn't, grab any of the other flooring, any of the other walls. Okay, so I'll grab that, attach that, and I'll just call it that same sort of thing, H4 IW floor 2. Okay, so that's all we have here for detaching all the large objects such as walls and reattaching them into manageable pieces. I'll just quickly show you, go over the detachment method if elements to objects don't work. So, for example, if we've got some cladding here, for example, so let's find some cladding, la 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 la, we might have put it into a separate, yep, there we go. So you can see here we've got cladding, we've got these ones here. Now, this cladding, I'm going to turn off the internal walls and materials. Now you can see this cladding here, which is the external parts of the building. If we look at the geometry of this is probably going to be one big piece. And even if we used element method, it would still be one big piece. So we use a slice plane to slice up the model, essentially, into manageable pieces. So there's a cut down there and a cut there, and wherever we want those cuts, so that we have these manageable pieces for light mapping. So if you pick the object, and you, first of all, it would be, here we've got it as an editable poly, but before you do anything, it'll be an editable mesh. Before you do anything, you'll go into edge mode. You'll go Control A to select all the edges, and you'll type in X on your keyboard, and because mine's an editable poly, it won't be here, but if you type in Viz, you'll see visible edges, you'll select that, and then all these little polygons, all these little edges within the wall itself that weren't there before will appear. That's the first step. Second step is and then is collapsing it to an editable poly. So you right click and you go editable poly. Okay, and then the next step is using the slice plane, which is here. So you'll click slice plane, and you'll see that this weird looking box thing comes up. And if you notice it, when you're dragging it around, you see a red line appears through your geometry. And if we can rotate this, so realistically we want to rotate it so it's going the other way if we wanted to split this wall up. But if we just rotate, you'll notice it's not snapping to any particular angle rotation. So if you press A on your keyboard first, then it will snap into nice 5-10 degree increments, so it's easy to get that exact straight up and down line there. Okay, and then we move it into position that we want, say there. We click slice, and it will then create geometry right through that piece of wall, making a nice box piece for us to be able to then detach off. So you would then unselect slice plane, you would pick your polygons, like so, and click detach. And then you would have, like this model has here, you would have these nice sort of clean pieces, easily light mapped. Okay, so that's all the walls and detaching all the large objects, such as walls and cladding. And reattaching them into manageable pieces for light maps. Okay, next we're going to look at deleting all the swinging doors. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to turn off the cladding. We'll turn on our materials. Okay, and we're going to look for the doors models. So you can see here we've got door hardware and door internal. Turn those on. Don't worry about these aluminium frame doors for the moment. Okay, so now we can see all of these doors. Okay, we can also see some pieces of door hardware, which are basically just handles that are sort of floating off in nowhere, which tells us that the Revit modeler hasn't put all of her doors onto the right model. So there'll be some doors. Potentially there'll be some doors showing up where they shouldn't be, and we'll have to go back and fix that once we can see it a little bit easier in Unreal Engine. So there's often lots of jumping back and forth between Macs once you've got it into Unreal, because you just can't see everything first go. So we can tell there's going to be a door there, but what we basically want to do is we'll use those hardware pieces as a reference guide. And what we're going to do is we're going to select our doors. So we're going into our modifiers, pick on our door, go into our modifiers, and we'll go into element method. And we'll pick on the door. And we're only picking the doors that have hardware on them at this point. Okay, because these are the doors that we don't want, that we want to put in manually, because it's just a lot easier to place them manually and then swing them open. And we can see here there's shitloads of doors, excuse my language, there's lots of doors here that aren't visible because there's no door there. So that's really, unfortunately, that's not really what we want, but it happens. Okay, we can see here we've got a door. Yep, that's got a handle, so we remove it. That's got a handle, so we select, we're clicking these doors. With element method, it's going to pick the door, the front, the back, and all the sides of the door. We want to remove all of that door geometry. These are sliding doors. You can sort of see there's the two there, and so they're probably, well, I know that they're doors for internal wardrobes. Like wardrobe doors, laundry doors, things like that, internal garage doors and things like that are just sliding doors often. And they're the doors that we don't often need to have open anyway. Okay, so I'm going to delete those and just leave them open. Now I'm going to just delete the door hardware as well. Actually, I'll leave it, but you can just turn it off in Unreal Engine. It's good sometimes not to necessarily delete things in case you make a mistake with what you're deleting. So for example, I might undo that, and what we'll do is we'll just detach these to a layer. So H for when my computer decides to not spaz out. So I'm going to call that H4 doors swing, okay? And those will be there in case I need them in the max file, but you know, we won't necessarily be putting them into our scene. Okay, and we'll hide these as well. And so that's where we want to be. So all these frames are still here. So, because the door models that are given to us by the Revit modeler, they have a door and a door frame in the model, and we just want that internal piece, the internal physical door gone. Okay, and that's that done, essentially. Okay, so now we're going to map everything for light maps. So essentially, everything now should be in manageable pieces. All our internal doors, cladding, cabinetry, everything. Alright. Now we can optimize some bits and pieces, but I like to do light maps first. We can optimize the cabinetry, so we sort of chamfering the edges a little bit more, but I like to do that sort of towards the end. Same with the UV mapping. I like to do for the textures. I like to do that at the end as well. So we'll select everything, and then we'll come to our steamroller script here. We'll select channel 2. 45 degrees is fine. 0.05 seems to work well for most things. And I'm just going to double check, make sure everything that I want selected is selected. So, yep, see, so it looked like I had cabinetry turned on, but I didn't. So it's always worth double checking what you're doing, taking your time, going through everything a bit more methodically, because it will save you time in the long run. Okay, so we select everything here, and then we click unwrap now. And that will take some time because there's so many models to unwrap. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back when it's done. Okay, so that's unwrapped now. The light maps are unwrapped. So if we pick on one of these objects, say this roof here, you'll see that there's a UVW or unwrap UVW modifier on it, essentially. So if we open up this panel here, there's a lot of crazy information. A lot of it you don't need. What you do need to do is open up. You can see that it's set to map channel 2. These are the pieces of information you need to know. It's set to map channel 2. That's where the light maps are created. And we need to look at the UV editor and just make sure it looks good. Okay, so it looks alright. It theoretically, you know, we could spend a long time, you know, really refining these maps, making these as great as possible. But for, you know, a quick turnaround, this will do the job fine. The issues we're going to be looking for are objects where there's tons of small little polygons, and you'll see it when we open it up in Unreal Engine. You'll see problems with light maps, but we'll deal with issues as we kind of go. That way you can actually, you know, see the problem and see the solution rather than being too preemptive. Alright, so what we're going to do now is select everything, Control A. When we're in the modifier stack, always remember, if you're in the modifiers for something like this and you go to try to click on something else, you can't click on something else because you're still in the modifiers for that object. So when you've finished with an object, finished doing the modification, you want to do something else, always just go into object mode. That'll allow you to select everything else, or anything else rather. Control A on the keyboard, that will select everything in your scene that is visible, which should be everything because we've just created the light maps for everything. And we're just going to collapse the light maps down. So I'm going to go to collapse to editable poly. And now you'll see that UVW map is gone. Unwrap UVW is gone. Now it's still technically there. It's just been kind of like hard baked or hard processed into the model. So if you actually put a modifier on there again, an unwrap UVW, and you went to map channel 2 and you opened it up, it would still be there. It's just you kind of removing the link to be able to make that modification. But the modification is built into the model now, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's light maps, nice and quick. Okay, so now we can use a UVW map modifier on channel 1 using box mode and untick real world scale, and then set it to a value of 100 centimeters. Now we'll do that, but before we do that, we might actually just look at optimizing and chamfering edges. Okay. So sometimes for areas that receive a lot of scrutiny, if we're trying to make things a bit more realistic, in the real world you wouldn't have, for example, this here, in the real world you wouldn't have an edge that is perfectly, sharp like that. It would actually be chamfered. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to particularly look at the kitchen here. Okay. So, because you can see there's a lot of cabinetry here. Cabinetry that, as I say, receives a lot of scrutiny. Now, we can also see here... I just deleted that, which was not good. It's not letting me undo. So this is one of the things. 3ds Max 2017 has some solid bugs in it. So we're going to go over to 3ds Max 2016 now, because I'm not in the mood for dealing with bugs. Okay, so now we've got this model open in 3ds Max 2016. So I've opened a model that has been already optimized. So what we've done with the kitchen cabinetry is often you'll find that the way that Revit generates cabinetry can be a bit cumbersome. There's often some issues. There's little things you got to fix here and there, and we'll look at that as we go, or what we've done to fix those issues. So what I did, if we have a look at this piece of cabinetry here, for example, the fronts of these kitchen cabinets, top kitchen cabinets, we can see here that we've got 3 grouped together. And I've applied this same rule of thumb that I've used on the walls, internal walls, to the cabinetry, the bench tops, etc. So if we look over here, we've got bench tops, and that was one model. I've split it into 5. See, 1, 2, 3, and that just gives us the chance to use a smaller light map. And it's also good because if there's a problem with it, you can isolate it, look at it a little further, because we do have shading issues with some of these models sometimes. Okay, so I've split that into 5 sections using that similar method. I've split the cabinetry base into, I don't know how many pieces here, like probably about 20. Look at my messy naming conventions, not good. That's what you don't want to do. Kickboard, I've split that up as well. So the kickboard is this little piece under here, these pieces under here. And I found they were giving me a bit of grief in terms of getting the right lighting on them, so I split them up into little pieces, just so I could make sure that they were getting plenty of light on them, because there's lots of shadowing happening around there, and the more detail we have there, the better shadowing we're going to get. So we've split those up, etc. So I'm just showing you how I've split them up, so you're not just looking at this and going, well, hold on, just raced ahead here. So it's a similar approach to the walls and cladding, how we're splitting that up. Now, I haven't on this model. I haven't gone, because we've had a fairly tight turnaround. I haven't gone and optimized it further by chamfering the edges. Okay, that's not to say that you can't or shouldn't. It just depends on our timelines. It can be pretty fiddly and frustrating at times. It just depends on how complex the kitchen cabinetry is. So if we isolate this piece, for example, here, we can see these edges would be really nice to chamfer a little bit, just so that, you know, that little rounded corner a little bit, it would happen. There's a couple of ways we can try doing this. Okay, so we can see we've got an unwrapped map on here. We're going to collapse that. Okay, and you can also see here I've got a bunch of custom buttons here that really help speed up my workflow, and I might make a little video on that at some point, or link you to a video on how to do that. It's quite useful. Rather than going down through here and looking for every modifier that you need every single time, you can customize these buttons. Okay, so one of the ones we can do is add a chamfer modifier to it. Okay, you click that and then bang. Okay, that looks horrible, doesn't it? But if we change the tolerance value to 0.5, okay, and we up the segments to say 3, okay, and we'll change that amount to say 2 or 0.5, half a centimeter often is quite nice. Okay, now you can see that it is doing a pretty good job all round. If we look at this, you know, if we turn off edged mode, you can now see it's got these nice smooth edges. We are getting a bit of artifacting here. Okay, and this is where where it can be a bit fiddly. He's looking at areas, so that's looking a bit nicer. And you can see the way the light is hitting this is quite nice. Now, the things to note here, before we go ahead and maybe look at fixing some of the artifacting, is before you add this modifier, you want to make sure that you have done your smoothing groups. Clear all, auto smooth. Okay, that will help a little bit. You may want to redo your smoothing groups with that corner piece in the end. Okay, and then we also want to make sure that our UV that our unwrap for our light maps has already been done. So you don't optimize until you've done your light maps. The reason for that is if we come in here and look at our unwrap UVW, okay, and we go to map channel 2, and we open up our editor. We go now move or abandon. Basically it's asking us, you've just changed it to map channel 2. It was by default set to 1, right? If you go move, it's going to take the stuff that's on map channel 1 and put it over the top of what's on map channel 2. So we want to abandon what's on 1 and just show us what's already on 2. So always click abandon if you want to look at what's existing on map channel 2. Open up the UV editor, and we'll see here we have our nice, we have our alright UV maps, light maps. Okay, now if we made light maps from a chamfered edge, we would find that this would be substantially more difficult for the software to flatten by itself without creating lots of little split off pieces, etc. So it's always good to do this first, I find. Always good to bake your light map, create your light maps first. So now, if we look at these edges here, what we can do, instead of just applying a chamfer modifier onto everything, is we can select the edges we want to chamfer. So, for example, we know these edges down the back here are going to be butt up against a wall, so it's not really going to be super visible. We want this one here. This one, oh, we don't want this one that's in the middle here. We want these edges. So control button, left click to select each edge. And if you accidentally hit the wrong edge, you go alt left click to deselect the edge. Okay, and then click here. And that's butt up against the wall too, so we probably don't need to do that. Okay, and then what we can do is we can right click and we can go, there's a chamfer option here. And if we pick this little box next to it, you'll see we get a bunch of options here. Okay, we want to change it from a triangle to a quad chamfer, first and foremost. And we'll set those same values, 0.5, 3, and 0.5. Okay. And we might up, yeah, that needs to be at like 2 or 3. Okay, and we can see now that we've got a nice corner here. Now we're still having this artifacting issue here. And what we can do, you can actually select or deselect edges. So, see, I'm left clicking. I am clicking Alt and left click on these edges. Or I'm left clicking. I'm holding Control and left clicking to select, because I've got these selected. I want to select more edges. So if I just left click, I would lose my selection over here. It's like this. See? So I go Control Z. So I can see here that it's just not smoothing that edge super nicely, unfortunately. It's not enjoying trying to do that. It may not be super noticeable. So if we turn that off, you know, with the cornerstone, bench stone, that may not be something you want to worry too much about. That little organic kind of dip in there a bit, it's probably not too bad. It probably looks better than, you know, that, to be honest. You're getting all these nice, you're going to get nice reflections and shading and stuff off the edges. Okay, so pick those, yeah, and that's not too bad. So now we're going to click OK, and now we can see that is, we go F4 to turn on our geometry. You can see that there's a lot more geometry in that model. Now, as far as our light maps go in relation to this, if we open our UVW map, once again go to 2, if it lets me, 2 and abandon, and then open the UV editor, we can now see that we have that extra geometry in there. But in general, you won't have any issues with overlapping geometry. So it's done a pretty okay job. Yeah, so we can't see anything overlapping there, so that's not too bad. I think you can actually, if you go to tools, I think you can we can ask it to show us, edit, select, yeah, select overlapping polygons, and then it will highlight anything if there's polygons overlapping, and our light maps will not be happy with that. Okay, so it's saying here that there's some stuff that's overlapping. It looks okay to me. So I'm just scrolling along looking for where it's apparently overlapping. It's looking pretty good to me, to be honest. If we have some issues with it, then we can deal with it as we go. We can maybe come back into it, modify things. Okay, so we'll close that. Yep, cool. Okie dokie. I'm just going back into shaded mode. Alright, so that's how you optimize kitchen cabinetry. And we'll convert that to editable poly. Now, if we look at our smoothing groups, once again on this model, and we come down, smoothing groups are still the same. Okay, so if we selected all of this and we went clear all and auto smooth, pretty much looks the same, but sometimes you may have issues. So I don't know, it's not going to hurt to redo. It's not necessarily, it's probably not going to hurt redoing them. I don't think it's needed though if you do it previously, because there you want a little edge there, but you still want some definition as you go around that corner. Okay, so you repeat that potentially for, you know, the remaining pieces there, and you could repeat that for you've got all of these pieces here. Now the laundry you probably wouldn't bother with, to be honest. You know, and some of these they look better when you've got those nice little smooth edges on them. So that's something to definitely think about, just depending on how quickly the job can be turned around. If we're looking at a 2 or 3 day turnaround for this thing, it may, you know, if that takes you half a day to do, if that takes you 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours to do, not so good. Really you should be looking at trying to do it, you know, in half an hour for that sort of optimization. Same with when we're looking at, if possible, when we're looking at breaking all this down. So if we're looking at where your goal to get to is essentially, this should take you 5 minutes. This should take you maybe 10 minutes, because you've got a, you know, it may take your computer 5 minutes to process. This should take you no more than an hour and a half. This is where you want to get to, rather. This light mapping, the texture mapping, we haven't done that. I'll put these optimizing edges up here. This you wouldn't want to spend any more than, you know, 30 minutes on that. And then this thing should only take you 5 minutes as well. So at least you've got a timeline here to sort of roughly kind of, okay, yep, that's how long it should take me. Or you want to aim for getting to that point. And that's all the optimization you'll essentially need to do before bringing it into Unreal at the beginning. You will have little problems as you come along. You bring it in, you see more and more of the model. You know, it is going to happen. So now this last little bit, exporting it using the TS tools. Super easy. So we're going to turn on everything. Yep. Turn off this. Now you'll notice there's some funky stuff in terms of my naming conventions here, like to re-import, etc. Basically this is and terrain, just ignore that. And I've got some front door models here that we're going to use across the board, so you can ignore those. So ignore that, and that, and that. So you'll bring in, and I've also broke the sliding doors up a bit actually as well. You can see here, if we turn these on, and I'll turn off these. You can see these sliding doors. So I've actually broken them down into a few models as well, just for light map's sake. So you can, break these things down as much as you feel you need to, but essentially so. All right. So you'll turn on everything that you want to bring into Unreal Engine. Architraves, material objects, etc. And we're just going to make sure that everything is switched on inside each model. Always looking inside the layers. Okay, we've got everything we need in the model here. Okay, now the only other thing you need to do, and I'm going to look for a script for this because I know one exists. We're going to try and auto smooth. Put an auto smooth on every object, just like we did the light mapping across every object. We're going to do an auto smooth on every object, and you can see this weird fucking, like, whatever the hell it is, shadow or whatever. That's a smoothing group issue. Not only is it a smoothing group issue, because potentially if I select it and I go down to my smoothing groups, clear all, auto smooth, it may not disappear. Clear all, auto smooth. It did, luckily, thank God. Sometimes these don't disappear because when we first bring them in, if we don't, from the mesh, when we import the Revit model, and then if it's in a editable mesh state, and we haven't turned on the invisible edges to visible, and we try to auto smooth, there's still some weird funky stuff going on there, and it can fuck up our shading of smoothing groups. Essentially, smoothing groups are used to tell the gaming engine how light hits the surface, so you could select this and this and make them on the same smoothing group, and that edge, it would average the light bouncing down and hitting that object, so it would look kind of like a smooth transition between those two, even though they're at a 90-degree angle. Alrighty, so I'm gonna end isolate on that. So we've got everything here that we want. I'm going to select Control A, or drag a box around it, Control A. And then we're going to open up our UE4 FBX exporter. It's a great tool. We don't want to move each object to 0, 0, 0. Each object will have a gizmo. Its gizmo will be down at 0, 0, 0. We don't want to move it. We don't want to change that gizmo location, because then if we do that, all the objects will come in and be plunked into this little spot right together, and we want them to know where they are in relation to each other, so that stays off. We don't need those collisions, and we'll get this to show us, this dialog here to show us. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the training folder. So yours may look a bit different the way you've split it up, and that's okay. I'm going into internal training projects, and I'm just going to create a new folder here for the example. Okay, and there we go. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to create another folder. So you had from client in yours, and now what I like to do is go max. So you've got a 3ds Max folder, so you know, okay, well, in that's where I know that in my 3ds Max folder, this is where all my Max related stuff is. So you'll have this file here, your working file in there, And then inside that max folder, you can either put it inside your max folder or maybe back here, you can create an FBX folder. So all the pieces of the design, the weld design, that get spat out by 3ds Max that have been processed, go into this FBX folder. So it's really just important to name it FBX. Like if it's floating around there somewhere, we'll find it eventually. Okay, and now we select that FBX, click OK, and now we go export. Now it's going to ask us for some settings. Basically, the things that are important are smoothing groups, triangulate, and preserve edge orientation. Other than that, you don't have to worry too much. If something's turned on or off, it doesn't really matter. And click OK. And you'll see now that this is going to just chomp through each object and export it to an FBX file. And I'll just pause that while that's doing its thing.